It was the summer of 2012, and I was living in Washington State, a place known for its lush forests and rugged terrain. As a hiker, I'd spent most of my life exploring the countless trails winding through the Cascades. There was something about the wilderness here that felt safe, comfortable. The air was always fresh, the scent of pine and damp earth filling your lungs as you trekked deeper into the woods. But that day, in those woods, everything changed. I had taken a few days off work to clear my head. It had been a stressful few months. There was a lot on my mind, and I thought some solitude in the mountains would do me good. I wasn't new to the area, and I knew the trails like the back of my hand. This particular hike I'd done dozens of times. A trail that looped up around a mountain ridge, offering a perfect mix of breathtaking views and solitude. It wasn't the most popular trail, so I was almost always alone. But that was exactly how I liked it. I preferred the quiet, the stillness of nature. The weather was perfect, clear skies, temperatures in the mid-70s, and a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves above me as I began my hike around 10 a.m. The trail was familiar, but as I moved deeper into the forest, the peace and calm started to shift. There was a strange tension in the air. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it was there, just enough to put me on edge. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, I'd hiked this trail countless times and never had any issues. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was a little off. The deeper I got, the quieter the forest became. The sounds of wildlife, usually abundant in the area, seemed to fade. Even the wind seemed to die down. The only thing I could hear was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the occasional distant rustle of the trees. But there was something different about it. It wasn't the usual sounds of a healthy forest. It was almost like the woods were holding their breath. I paused to take a sip from my water bottle and looked around. The trees were tall and imposing, their thick trunks twisting upwards like ancient sentinels. The trail was becoming less defined now, overgrown in some spots, as it snaked through dense underbrush. The last few miles had been mostly uphill, and I was starting to feel the strain in my legs. Still, I pressed on, telling myself I was nearly halfway around the loop. It was then that I noticed the footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were too large, too deliberate. Human footprints, leading off the trail into the dense undergrowth. At first, I thought maybe they were from someone who had come before me, but something about them unsettled me. They weren't the casual footprints of a hiker. These were heavy, almost urgent, as if someone had been walking fast, maybe even running. I stood there for a moment, considering whether or not I should follow them. The logical part of me said to stay on my trail, that it was probably nothing. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself stepping off the path, following the prints into the brush. The forest here was thick, the trees closer together, and the undergrowth was dense with ferns and vines. As I pushed through the vegetation, the air felt heavier, colder. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach, but I told myself it was just nerves. There was no reason to be scared, right? The prints led me to a small clearing, and for a moment, I thought I had made a mistake. There was nothing unusual here, just a small patch of sunlight filtering through the canopy above. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling of unease. But then, I saw something in the distance, movement, a flicker of motion between the trees. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, staring into the trees, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The movement was subtle, like someone ducking behind a tree. I couldn't make out any features, just the shape of a person, or something that looked like a person, standing just outside the clearing. I stood still for what felt like an eternity, waiting for whatever it was to move again. When it did, it wasn't a human shape at all. It was a figure, tall and thin, moving quickly, almost unnaturally fast, disappearing behind a large tree. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a person. It was something else. My first instinct was to run, but my feet felt frozen to the ground. I stood there, in the middle of the clearing, heart pounding, as the quiet of the forest seemed to swallow me whole. I waited, not daring to make a sound. The world around me felt like it was holding its breath. There was no sound, no movement, just that same eerie stillness that had been hanging in the air since I first felt the tension. But after what felt like hours, the forest began to come alive again. A bird called out from the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. But the figure, whatever it had been, was gone. I didn't stay in the clearing. I turned around, my instincts screaming at me to get back to the trail. I retraced my steps, but it wasn't long before I noticed something else. The footprints I had followed earlier weren't leading back toward the trail. They were leading deeper into the woods. The same fast, heavy steps now leading away from where I had seen the figure. I was almost certain I wasn't alone out here anymore. My pace quickened as I moved back onto the main trail, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every rustle in the trees, every movement of the wind, made me jump. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The sounds in the woods weren't right anymore. They were too deliberate, too calculated. The rest of the hike was a blur of panic and adrenaline. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something was just behind me, hidden in the trees, waiting for me to make a mistake. By the time I reached the end of the loop, the sun was low in the sky. The shadows had grown long, and the forest had turned into a labyrinth of dark shapes. When I finally emerged from the woods, I was physically exhausted, but my mind was racing. I couldn't explain what had happened out there. I didn't know what I had seen or heard, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone on that trail. Someone or something had been out there with me. I didn't tell anyone about the encounter. I didn't know how to explain it. Even now, years later, when I think back on that hike, I still don't have any answers. All I know is that I wasn't the only one in those woods. And whatever it was, I hope it never follows me again. It was a late summer night when it happened. The kind of night that promised nothing more than a few quiet hours in the wilderness. The stars were bright above, and the air had that crisp chill to it that made everything feel still, even though the forest around me was alive. I was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, a place I often visited for some solitude. Hiking was my escape, and camping was a chance to shut out the world and reconnect with nature. It was supposed to be peaceful. It should have been peaceful. I had set up camp earlier that evening, an unremarkable spot in a small clearing, surrounded by trees and the quiet hum of nocturnal life. I had pitched my tent, built a small fire, and settled in with a book, listening to the crackling of the flames. My mind wandered as the firelight flickered, my thoughts as erratic as the shadows dancing around me. I'd hiked all day and was ready to sleep under the stars. There was something about the calm of the night that always brought peace to my otherwise chaotic mind. I finished the last of my tea, stowed my gear, and crawled into my tent, zipping it up securely. The sound of the forest filled the silence. The gentle wind moving through the trees, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant calls of animals. It was all so familiar, so comforting. I had camped in this exact spot before, several times in fact, and nothing ever went wrong. But that night was different. The wind picked up, and with it came a sudden, heavy thudding sound. At first, I thought it was just the forest playing its tricks. Sometimes the wind would shake the branches, making them creak and snap. But then it came again, louder this time. Thud, thud, thud. It was like a heavy animal, something huge, moving through the forest. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable. It was too close, much too close. I froze, straining my ears to pick up anything else. But the only thing I could hear was that relentless thudding, each step pounding the earth with a force that felt like it could shake the trees themselves. My mind raced, trying to figure out what it could be. I'd hiked these trails many times, and I knew that wildlife, especially larger animals, roamed the woods. A bear, maybe, or a deer. It didn't sound right. It wasn't the soft, distant thud of a deer or a bear loping through the underbrush. This was something heavier, something bigger. The sound stopped suddenly. I was left in the eerie silence, the weight of my own breath filling my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it, but then I heard it again. This time, the thudding was right next to my tent. Thud, The ground beneath me seemed to tremble with each step. It was so close, I could feel the vibrations in the earth. My heart pounded in my chest as panic set in. I knew what it was now. A moose. It had to be a moose. The heavy, lumbering gait, the size of it, the force of each step. It couldn't be anything else. I pressed myself back into the corner of the tent, holding my breath. The fabric of the tent felt impossibly thin now, as if the slightest movement would give away my position. The moose's steps were uneven, as if it was disoriented, maybe lost or just moving through the area without concern. Its massive body was too close, and the way it moved made me realize just how fragile I was in that moment. I could hear it snorting and breathing heavily. The sounds it made were so primal, so wild. It wasn't just a moose wandering through the woods. It was a massive creature in full stride, unaware of the fragile human life it was moving past. I thought about the danger of it. Moose were unpredictable. They weren't aggressive by nature, but if startled, if threatened, they could be lethal. And here I was, trapped in my tent, just feet away from a creature that could easily kill me if it felt threatened. The thudding stopped again. Silence. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart racing in my chest. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement. But all I could hear was the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig as the moose moved through the underbrush. My mind raced with all the ways things could go wrong. What if it stepped on the tent? What if it charged? What if it decided I was a threat? Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the tent shook violently. I gasped, holding my breath, my whole body going rigid. The moose had come crashing through the trees, its massive body smashing through the branches, completely unaware of the danger it posed. The sound was deafening, like a freight train roaring through the forest. It wasn't just a few steps or a quick movement. It was a full-on collision with the forest, the trees shaking as the moose barreled through them. I could hear the heavy breathing of the animal, just inches from my tent. My whole body went cold with fear. The moose was so close, I could feel the heat radiating off of it. His body was so large, I imagined it could easily crush me if it wanted to. I stayed perfectly still, not daring to move a muscle, praying that it would leave. The moose's movements were erratic now, its hooves pounding against the earth, trampling through the underbrush. I could hear it snorting, its breath ragged. Then, I felt it. The ground under my tent trembled as the animal moved past, so close that I could feel the weight of it as it passed just inches from me. My body was frozen in place, my heart thudding in my chest as the moose continued to move through the woods, unaware of how close it had come to ending my life. The sounds of the moose faded into the distance, slowly at first, until it was gone entirely. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, motionless, waiting for the sound of its hooves to fade away completely. I could hear my breath, shallow and quick, echoing in the quiet forest. When I finally dared to move, I slowly reached for the zipper of the tent, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I opened the flap just a crack, peering out into the darkness. The forest was silent now. The moose was gone. I didn't leave the tent that night. I stayed there, lying awake, unable to calm my racing thoughts. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the memory of the moose's body so close to me haunted my every breath. I didn't even close my eyes. The night dragged on endlessly. In the morning, I crawled out of my tent, exhausted and shaken. The forest looked peaceful in the daylight, the trees standing tall and still, as if nothing had happened. But the ground around my campsite told a different story. There were broken branches, crushed leaves, and trampled earth all around me. The moose had come so close, it had left a path of destruction in its wake. It had passed within 2 feet of my tent, and I had been oblivious to the danger, trusting the wilderness as I always had. I packed up quickly, my mind still reeling from the experience. I had always known that hiking and camping in the wild had risks, but the reality of how close I had come to death, how narrowly I had avoided being trampled by a 1,000-pound animal, was something that shook me to my core. The wilderness was beautiful, yes, but it was also unforgiving. And that night, it had reminded me just how quickly things could go wrong. It was a late summer afternoon when my two buddies and I set off on the Appalachian Trail, aiming to hike a section of it we'd been talking about for months. None of us were expert hikers, but we were all fit enough to take on a few days of rough trails. So we had the gear packed, the route planned, and our spirits high. There's something calming about the idea of just walking through the wilderness for a few days, cutting out all the noise of the world and diving into the quiet solitude of nature. We were in good spirits as we hiked, chatting occasionally, but mostly just enjoying the sound of our boots on the dirt and the occasional birdsong. The trail was beautiful, surrounded by trees that filtered the sunlight into slivers, and the air was warm with a slight breeze that kept us from getting too hot. The only real challenge was the constant uphill climb, but we kept moving, taking breaks when we needed to and pushing on when we felt strong. Somewhere about halfway through our hike that day, we came across something strange. It was a section of trail that seemed oddly still, almost as if it were waiting for us. I first noticed it because of the way the light hit the ground. It cast a shadow on a bundle of sticks placed right in the middle of the trail. The sticks were arranged in a shape almost like a little figure, similar to something you might see in the movie Blair Witch Project. It was about waist-high, made from various thin branches and twigs, carefully twisted and shaped, leaning against a large rock at the edge of the path. It didn't look like something that belonged there. It was too deliberate, too out of place. It wasn't like an animal had left it or that it had fallen naturally. Someone had definitely placed it there, and from the way it stood in the middle of the trail, it felt almost like it was waiting for us. I'm not usually one to get freaked out over little things, but there was something about it that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the isolation of the spot, the fact that we hadn't seen another soul for miles, or the fact that it felt wrong. At first, I thought about leaving it there, but then I thought, why not? It's just a bundle of sticks. I didn't see any harm in picking it up. So, I grabbed it, carefully examining it for a moment before I shoved it into my backpack. I thought it was a bit quirky, maybe even cool in a strange way. We didn't think much more of it, and we carried on with our hike, eventually setting up camp a few hours later. We found a nice flat area near a creek, where we could pitch our tents and gather wood for a fire. The mood had shifted, and it was lighter now that we had a camp set up. We were all pretty wiped out from the day's hike, so after dinner, we each crawled into our tents to get some rest. The sun dipped behind the trees, leaving the sky painted with warm hues of orange and pink, and soon everything was quiet. That night, I fell asleep almost immediately. There's something about the fresh air and the sound of the creek nearby that makes it easy to drift off. But in the middle of the night, I woke up for no particular reason. I lay there for a while, staring up at the inside of my tent, listening to the night sounds around me. The wind, the occasional rustle of branches, and the murmur of the creek all blended into a kind of white noise. The forest felt alive, but also eerily silent at the same time, like everything had paused for a moment. I turned over onto my side and tried to go back to sleep, but then something strange happened. From outside my tent, I heard what sounded like a faint rustling, followed by a soft thud, almost like something heavy was being dropped onto the ground. I froze, listening intently. Another rustle, then the unmistakable sound of something moving quietly through the underbrush. It wasn't an animal, no, it wasn't that kind of sound. It was too deliberate, too slow. I told myself I was overthinking it. It was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon, I tried to convince myself. I had a lot of experience hiking and camping, and the woods at night were always full of noises. But this felt different. It felt like someone, or something, was out there, moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. But I didn't hear anything else, and after a few moments, I shrugged it off and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up early, as I usually do when I'm camping. The air was cool and crisp, and the first light of day was creeping in through the trees. I got up, rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, and decided to make coffee before the others were up. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the quiet morning. I was still groggy from sleep, but as I walked toward the fire pit, something stopped me cold. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. There, sitting perfectly atop the pile of charred wood from the night before, was the exact same bundle of sticks we had found on the trail the day before. It was identical. The shape, the size, everything about it was the same. The sticks were arranged the same way, leaning at the same angle, positioned in exactly the same spot. I froze for a second, my heart beginning to race. I looked around, hoping to see one of my friends nearby, thinking maybe they had gotten up early and placed it there as a joke. But they were still sleeping in their tents. I thought back to the night before, the rustling sounds I had heard. Could one of them have snuck out and placed it there while I was asleep? It seemed unlikely. We had all been tired after the hike, and no one had mentioned anything about leaving the camp after we'd all settled in for the night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I immediately checked my backpack. Sure enough, the bundle I had picked up from the trail the day before was still there, tucked inside. The one I found in the morning was identical, but it wasn't the same one. That much was clear. I called my buddies over and showed them the bundle of sticks. They were both as confused as I was. We all swore up and down that none of us had placed it there. My first thought was that one of them had pulled a prank on me, but that didn't make sense either. There was no way they could have replicated the exact same bundle of sticks without seeing the one in my backpack. And besides, we were in the middle of nowhere. There was no way one of them could have gone out there and set it up without either of us hearing them or seeing them leave. We searched the area, trying to figure out if someone had been messing with us. But there was no sign of any other human activity, no footprints, no disturbed ground. Just the same quiet woods, the same isolation. We packed up and left the campsite earlier than planned. None of us felt comfortable staying in that spot any longer. It was a strange, unnerving experience. I still don't know what to make of it. There are 100 possible explanations, but none of them fully add up. Maybe it was a prank after all. Maybe one of my friends had sneaked out while the other was asleep. Or maybe we had stumbled upon something in the woods that wasn't meant to be found. Whatever the explanation, the weird thing is that it's never really left my mind. The image of that identical bundle of sticks, sitting there on the charred remains of the fire, just won't go away. It's one of those things I'll never fully understand, and that's what makes it so unsettling. I want to believe it was just a prank, but deep down, part of me knows there was something more to it, something I'll never figure out. We finished the hike, but there was an unease that lingered in the back of my mind the whole time. I can't help but wonder if we were being watched that night, if someone or something was out there, just beyond the edge of the camp, placing those bundles of sticks in our path. I haven't been back to that section of the Appalachian Trail since. Maybe I will one day, but not anytime soon. Because no matter how many times I try to explain it away, the image of that figure of sticks in the middle of the trail and the one by the fire will always stay with me. And it's a memory that I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. It was late in the afternoon when I first laid eyes on it. The trail was getting thinner, winding deeper into the woods as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the path. I was hiking alone, just me and my backpack on a section of the Appalachian Trail I'd always wanted to try. The idea of being out here, away from the noise and the stress of everyday life, was appealing. I had been on trails before, but something about this particular one felt different. Maybe it was the solitude, or maybe it was the fact that I had been walking for hours, with nothing but the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt and the occasional rustle in the trees. I wasn't exactly lost, but I wasn't exactly sure where I was either. I had a map, but as the trail twisted and turned, it was hard to keep track of the landmarks. My phone had no signal, so I was really just relying on instinct and the vague sense of direction I had picked up from previous hikes. The trail itself was quiet, more isolated than I had expected. The deeper I went, the more I felt the weight of the wilderness surrounding me. Then I saw it. It was in the middle of the trail, right in front of me, just a few feet away. At first, I thought it was just a bundle of sticks, maybe some debris from the trees, or a pile of firewood that someone had left behind. But then I took a closer look. It wasn't just a random pile, it was arranged. The sticks were carefully placed, tied together in a crude but deliberate manner. It was a figure, standing upright, about knee-high, leaning against a large rock on the side of the trail. It reminded me of something you'd see in one of those horror movies, the kind where people stumble upon strange, inexplicable objects in the woods, only to regret it later. My first instinct was to leave it alone. My mind flashed to all the horror movie cliches, The cursed object, the warning signs, the feeling that something was off. But then, for some reason, I decided to do the opposite. I thought it was cool. It wasn't every day you stumbled upon something like that in the woods. A strange little figure made out of sticks, sitting right in the middle of the trail. Felt like a weird piece of art, like someone had left it for someone else to find. I'm not sure why I felt this way, but I did. So I bent down, picked it up, and shoved it into my backpack. It wasn't particularly heavy, but it felt solid, like it had been there for a while. The rest of the hike went on without incident. I kept moving, the sound of my footsteps the only noise I could hear. I didn't think much about the figure after that. I mean, I should have stopped, thought about it more carefully, but I didn't. I was tired, just wanting to get to my campsite for the night. The sun was setting, and I knew I needed to find a good spot to set up my tent before it got too dark. After another half hour or so of hiking, I found a decent place to camp. It wasn't perfect, there was a bit of a slope, but it would do. I pitched my tent, set up my stove, and started cooking dinner. The night was coming on fast, the sky darkening and the stars beginning to peek out from behind the trees. I could hear the sounds of the forest around me. Crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional distant call of an owl. Everything felt normal, but something about the silence of the woods made it feel unsettling. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but the stillness was thick, like the air itself was waiting for something. I ate my meal, cleaned up, and crawled into my tent. I was exhausted, the day's hike taking more out of me than I had anticipated. The warmth of my sleeping bag enveloped me, and soon, I was drifting off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of the night. It was peaceful, but it wasn't long before I was woken up by something. A noise, a soft sound just outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. The forest was full of life, and I'd heard critters moving around at night before. But this was different. It wasn't the usual rustling. It sounded like something heavier, something that was moving deliberately, like it was trying to avoid being heard. I lay still in my tent, my heart beating faster. The sound didn't stop, and it wasn't far off, it was close, too close. I thought about getting up and checking, but something held me back. I told myself it was just an animal, nothing to worry about. But even as I thought that, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The noise continued, circling my camp, moving closer, and then there was a soft thud, like something heavy being dropped to the ground. I held my breath. Silence followed. It was the silence that made it worse. The kind of silence that presses down on you, like the world is holding its breath. And then, without warning, I heard something even more unsettling. A quiet, faint scraping sound, as if something was dragging along the ground just outside my tent. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent, barely making a sound, and stuck my head out. There was nothing there. The camp was empty, the only sounds being the soft rustle of the wind in the trees and the distant murmur of a stream nearby. I stood there, heart pounding, staring into the darkness. It was just the wind. I had to be imagining things. But then I looked down. There, in the soft earth near the edge of my tent, was a small trail of broken twigs, leading off into the woods. It was as if someone had walked through my camp without making a sound, leaving behind nothing but a trail of debris. And in the middle of the trail, right where I had been lying just moments before, was a small, familiar figure. The bundle of sticks. It was exactly the same as the one I had picked up earlier that day, the one I had shoved into my backpack, the one I thought was cool. Now, it was sitting there in front of me in the exact same position, as though it had been placed there deliberately. There was no way it could have fallen out of my backpack. No way it could have ended up right here, right at the edge of my tent, without someone having moved it. I froze. It was one of those moments where your brain can't catch up to what you're seeing. It was so impossible that it almost felt like a dream. But it wasn't. I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears, the blood rushing to my head. I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to believe what my mind was suggesting. I didn't want to think that someone or something had been watching me all night, placing that figure there to torment me. I knew then I had made a mistake. I had taken something from the woods, something that wasn't mine, something that was never meant to be moved. I had broken an unspoken rule, and now the woods were telling me, in their own way, that they wanted it back. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my backpack, threw it over my shoulder, and without a second thought, I left my campsite. I didn't care about the fire or my gear. I just needed to get out. The sounds of the forest followed me as I hurried down the trail, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the main trailhead, the sun was rising, casting its first light over the woods. I didn't feel any safer, though. The woods still felt like they were watching me. I got to my car, threw my pack in the back, and drove off without a word. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that trail, and even then, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something waiting for me to come back. I've never gone back to that part of the Appalachian Trail. Sometimes, when I see a bundle of sticks on a hike, I feel that same unease in the pit of my stomach. Maybe it's just me being paranoid, but I don't think I'll ever truly know. I learned the hard way. Sometimes it's better to leave things in the woods, where they belong. I hiked the Appalachian Trail back in 2019, started in Georgia, and planned to go all the way to Maine. I wasn't new to hiking or camping, but this was the first time I was going to be out that long, that deep, and that far from people I actually knew. I trained for months. I tested my gear in every kind of weather I could. I read blogs, watched videos, talked to people who had done it. I wasn't arrogant about it. I just felt ready. I didn't start alone. There were others on the same leg, beginning around the same time. The trail has this way of gathering people into small groups, whether you plan for it or not. You meet someone at a shelter or a campsite, then you leapfrog over each other for days or weeks. People come and go. That's the rhythm of the trail. You're alone sometimes, then you're not. Most people were kind. That was something I noticed right away. Friendly in a quiet way. No one was overly chatty, because everyone was tired, dirty, focused on what was ahead. But there was a shared understanding, a kind of respect among hikers. That's what made the ones who didn't fit in really stand out. I met one of those in Tennessee, or maybe it was just past the border, near Roan Mountain. I don't remember the exact mile marker, but I remember the shelter, a three-sided wooden lean-to that faced a small clearing. A trickle of a stream was nearby, enough to refill water bottles with a filter. I'd gotten there late in the afternoon. There was only one guy there already. He was sitting on the edge of the shelter, staring off into the trees. His pack was neat, no clutter, everything rolled tight and in place. I nodded when I walked up. He didn't nod back, just glanced over, then back to the woods. That wasn't strange by itself. People are in their heads out there. I minded my own business, took off my pack, stretched my legs, and started boiling water for dinner. But I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye. His movements were too deliberate, like he was thinking too hard about each one. When he stood, he didn't just get up. He unfolded slowly, like someone who wasn't used to their own body. He walked out toward the trees and stood there for a long time, doing nothing. No stretching, no bathroom break, no looking around. Just standing still. Then he turned and walked back the same way without making a sound. That night, I set up my sleeping pad in the corner of the shelter. He laid out his gear right in the middle, not close to me but not far either. He didn't use a sleeping bag, just a thin mat and a blanket. No pillow. I lay there in my bag, pretending to sleep. He never really settled in. Just lay there flat, eyes open, not blinking. I got up before dawn, packed my stuff in the dark. Didn't eat breakfast, just wanted to move. I passed a couple hikers later that day, told them about the guy. They hadn't seen him, but nodded like they understood. Everyone had stories like that, people who gave you a weird feeling. But nothing had ever come of it, they said. Still, I kept moving fast the next couple days. Camped away from shelters, sometimes just off the trail. Weeks passed. The weather changed. I got leaner. My boots wore down. I saw the same faces every so often. Most people were predictable. You'd recognize them by their gear or gait or their dog. But every now and then, someone wouldn't match the rhythm. You'd be hiking for hours and suddenly pass someone standing on the trail. Not resting, not eating, just standing. There was this one guy I passed in Virginia. He was squatting off to the side, not really doing anything. He didn't have a pack, just clothes that didn't look right, cotton shirt, jeans. Not hiking gear, no water bottle, no food bag. When I walked by, he smiled. Not at me, just smiled. Like someone who had heard a good joke a long time ago and was still thinking about it. I saw him again that evening at a shelter. Still no gear, just sitting there on the picnic table like he belonged. I didn't stop. I walked a bit past the shelter and camped alone that night. I didn't sleep much. That was the first time I started to question my plan. Up to that point, I had been making good time. I'd had a couple of rainy days and one twisted ankle, but nothing serious. But after that second guy, the one with the grin and no pack, I started feeling watched. Not constantly, just sometimes. Like a bird had gone quiet. Like the woods were holding their breath. A few nights later, I camped just off the trail near a wide stream. There were a couple other tents nearby, far enough to be out of sight but close enough to feel safe. I was cooking when I saw someone up on the ridge above the stream, just standing there, not walking, not looking down. Just still. I tried to convince myself it was a tree stump or a shadow, but it wasn't. That night I kept waking up. There were small noises, not loud, but different. Not wind, not animals, twigs snapping, feet shifting in leaves. Once, I thought I saw a shadow pass near the edge of my tent. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just laid there, staring at the roof of the tent, hand on the handle of my knife. Morning came slow. When I got up, there were no footprints, but the leaves around my tent had been disturbed, just slightly, like someone had circled the tent slowly, careful not to leave a clear trail. I kept moving. I passed through Shenandoah, then into Pennsylvania. My food bag got lighter. My beard got longer. I didn't enjoy camp anymore. I stopped using shelters. I picked weird spots to sleep, off-trail, behind thick brush, where no one would see my tent. I barely used my headlamp at night. I didn't want to be seen. I started hiking longer days, 20 miles, sometimes more. I was pushing myself too hard, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be around other hikers. Even if we didn't talk, I wanted someone within earshot. I stopped at shelters during daylight just to eat, then kept going. It was around New Jersey where things came to a head. I had stopped at a shelter late in the afternoon, thinking I might push on a bit further. But I was tired. My feet hurt. There were two people already there, a couple I'd seen a few times before. I felt a little more relaxed seeing them. I sat down, took my boots off, boiled water. Then the man from Roan Mountain walked in. I recognized him right away. Same build, same gait, same blank face. He didn't look at me, just sat on the edge of the shelter, facing the woods. Didn't say anything. I watched him as I ate. He still moved like he didn't live inside his own skin, like he was copying something he saw someone else do. The couple didn't seem to notice him. Maybe they weren't getting the same feeling, or maybe they were just too used to oddballs on the trail. But I couldn't stay. I packed up quickly, told them I was pushing on even though the sun was dropping. I didn't wait for them to answer. I walked another 3 miles before I found a spot I could tuck into, a narrow hollow off a side trail. It wasn't flat and it wasn't ideal, but I didn't care. I just wanted distance. I didn't cook. I didn't even change out of my clothes. Just climbed into my bag and zipped the tent up. I woke up in the dark, not sure what time. The air was heavy. Still, no wind, no bugs. My tent was quiet, but something felt off. I lay there a while, then reached for my flashlight. I didn't turn it on right away. I just held it. Then I heard a sound, soft, steady breathing. It wasn't mine. I held my breath. The sound kept going. Slow. Inhale. Exhale. Like someone was crouched down outside the tent. Not moving, just breathing. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't move. I just laid there, heart pounding, trying to stay still. It went on for minutes. Could have been longer. Then it stopped. Not suddenly. It just faded, like someone backing away slowly. I waited another hour before I moved. When I finally stepped outside, the woods looked normal, but I saw prints in the dirt. Bare feet, not boots, toes splayed out deep in the heel. That was the last night I camped on the trail. The next day, I hiked straight to the nearest road crossing and hitched into town. I booked a cheap room and sat in the shower for almost an hour. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept the lights on. I didn't quit the trail then, but I changed the way I did it. From that point on, I only hiked sections with people I met and trusted. I arranged rides between points. I didn't hike alone anymore, and I never slept out solo again. I still think about it. About the man at the shelter and the guy with no gear and the one breathing outside my tent. I don't think they were the same person, but I do think they were connected somehow. Not like a group, just the same kind of wrong. Like people pretending to be hikers but missing something human. People ask me if they should hike the Appalachian Trail. I say yes, but not alone. Never alone. Not because of animals or weather or injury, those are real risks, sure. But because every once in a while you meet someone out there who's not playing by the same rules. And if you're alone, there's no one to see it happen, and no one to help you if it does.